Welcome back. All right, so before turning in for the night, I'm going to upload a video. I'm going to record it now, and of course, a lot of people will watch it in the morning from work, or lunch breaks and all that fun stuff, school, that whole bit. So, I want to talk about the Norris Trophy for a second. So I threw on the Erik Karlsson because he gets talked about like he's just going to win it right now, and I understand the points he's putting up are ridiculous, but I want to have the Norris discussion now. We're around the quarter pole for the season, so it's a good time to talk about it. I wanted to make sure I had at least one defenseman from each team on the board. And here's why. Whenever I talk about the Calder, there is plenty of discussion about other defensemen I've left off the board. So it's not a video that I can do in the standard 32 teams, 32 players format. That won't work because there's going to be, well, wait a second. So I've tried my best to avoid the wait a seconds. And I did this in a certain order for a reason. So I started with Seattle, because Seattle's the toughest one to find a defenseman. You would say, yeah, Norris level. And people are going to look at that and say, Adam Larsson. And they're going to laugh. But defensively, Larsson's been fantastic for Seattle this year. He's getting a lot of minutes. He may not get points like a Karlsson ever. He may not get as many points in his career as Karlsson can in a season. But Larsson is a solid defenseman for Seattle. He's been a very good pickup. And so there you go. Chicago is tough to find a defenseman. Seth Jones is the biggest name. He's the biggest paid. Outside of him, I don't know that there's somebody that I look at and say that's a contender. Now, I'm not talking about later. I'm not talking about guys who aren't in the NHL yet, because then you get into this whole other area of Nemitz and various players who aren't in the league yet. And there are a couple for Chicago that at some point emerges top two in all likelihood, and who knows. But Seth Jones is the closest I could find. Now, for Arizona, this is where it's interesting. I like J.J. Mosier. I think he's a very good defenseman, and I think he's going to get well paid by the Coyotes once his contract's up. Jacob Chychrun, of course, is supposed to return to action tomorrow. And from then going forward, the understanding is he will be traded. And so if he comes back and he plays well, he very likely gets traded for a lot. Jacob Chychrun, once he's in a big market, like let's just say it's Toronto. Let's just, for the sake of argument, say it's Toronto. I think Leaf fans, if he's 100% healthy, will love him, and he will immediately start getting mentioned for Norris Trophy consideration because people will be paying more attention to him than they did when he was in Arizona. Think along the lines of Mark Stone leaving Ottawa to go to Vegas and getting more attention when it comes to the Selke Trophy because people really understood, hey, this guy's really good at both ends of the ice. Yes. For Vancouver, it's Quinn Hughes. I could have put up OEL, but I couldn't find a justification. Quinn Hughes, offensively, excellent defenseman. Does he have defensive issues? Yes. The thing is that for Erik Karlsson, he had a Mark Methot. Quinn Hughes, you have Luke Schenn. I don't know that he has a defenseman right now, though, that is of the caliber of a Mark Methot. Maybe that is why they were rumored to be interested in John Marino before he got traded to New Jersey. He is no longer available. Because I think Marino, if he was with Hughes, that would be fantastic. And I don't care if one's left-handed and the other's left-handed or both right-handed. Marino is fantastic no matter what position you put him in. Anaheim, Cam Fowler. Cam Fowler's an underrated defenseman who has had a very good career. He's honestly having a good season on a team that's not having a good season. Fowler's been prominent, so I thought throw him up there. For Columbus, Zach Werenski's year gets ended early. And so Werenski is still the guy that you would look at from Columbus as, a potential Norris contender. Outside of that, it's a good group. The closest I could find would be like Gavrikov. But again, Gavrikov's not going to put up the points to get real Norris consideration. Philadelphia, Ivan Provorov, I still think is their best defenseman. We've finally stopped hearing about Matt Niskanen no longer being his partner on the blue line. That was the conversation for years. Tony DeAngelo, I have to throw him on the board, and here's why. A lot of minutes? Yes. Points? Absolutely. I don't think he's defensively having the same problems he had in previous seasons. I think in Philadelphia he's picked up some of his game there. I'm not saying he ever wins Norris. It's just I can't just put Provorov, not put DeAngelo, even though DeAngelo's numbers are better overall. Caden Gooley is one that Montreal Canadian fans are excited about. They're right. I don't think he's going to win any trophies this year. I don't see him being called a winner. He's not going to get the points for that, but he's a very good, solid defenseman with a fantastic upside and is arguably one of their best defensemen. I can't put Jack-Eye. He's a good, hard-working defenseman, but Gooley's got more upside. The Islanders, I had to put three guys. Here's why. Pulock and Pelech are two that play together. They're fantastic defensively. Pulock, I think, is the best of the three on the board. But Noah Dobson may end up getting the consideration when it comes to Norris because he's putting up the points, which would be very frustrating, right? It would be very frustrating on some level to not see Pulock or Pelech getting that consideration that Dobson could, because Dobson will be putting up better numbers. The Oilers, Darnell Nurse. There are other good defensemen here. I think Bouchard could develop into that kind of a defenseman. But Darnell Nurse, he's paid really well. I don't think he's going to win a Norris, but he's definitely had a decent year thus far. For Detroit, Moritz Seider, there was a lot of excitement about him coming out of last season, rightfully so. And I thought about putting Hronek on the board because Hronek's had a very good start to the season. I just don't see him as a Norris contender, but Seider, sure. On the Buffalo side, Rasmus Dahlin gets all the headlines. Offensively, very gifted. Defensively, he's solid as well. Plays a ton of minutes. But Owen Power, I still think long-term, Owen Power could be that absolute beast on the blue line for them, who may end up getting them those kinds of... And, you know, I'm trying to think of like a comparable... Like maybe he'll put up like Scott Stevens type. But again, Scott Stevens was a completely different type of player. It's just Power. He has fit seamlessly into the NHL. He doesn't seem to be having the same difficulties with the adjustments as Dahlin has had at times. And so I'm really excited about what Power's going to be able to do for them. Well, it's been a rough start to the season. The 7-11 record's not good enough for Buffalo or their fans right now. But yeah, Power and Dahlin, that's a good core to build that defense around. And I didn't even put Samuelson up there. Colorado, you've got Cale Makar, who is, I still think, the best defenseman in the league right now. No offense to Victor Hedman, but I think Makar has now eclipsed him as the best defenseman in the league. And no offense to Erik Karlsson either. But you've got Devon Taves, who has arguably been almost as good, maybe as good at times as well. And then Bowen Byram, who's currently on the injured list. But Bowen Byram has the potential to be that fantastic superstar on the blue line, too. Colorado's got an embarrassment of riches, as does New Jersey. So with New Jersey, this is where I had to think, okay, Dougie Hamilton's got the points, right? A lot of points with Dougie Hamilton. John Marino getting points now. So the offense wasn't there to start the season. Now it is. Defensively, the guy's an absolute workhorse. And then you've got Jonas Siegenthaler, one of the more elite defensive defensemen in the league. And Siegenthaler might right now be the best example of the need for a split. You have the Norris Trophy to your best offensive defenseman, or best maybe all around, and then have a best defensive defenseman. Same way you have a Selke Trophy for forwards, you would have a Langway Trophy for the defensive defenseman. And the reason we mentioned Langway is because he was one that actually stood out in the 80s enough that he got Norris consideration and a Norris Trophy while not putting up very many points in an era where everybody else did. Siegenthaler reminds me a lot of him in that Siegenthaler's elite defensively, but I don't know that he's going to get a lot of consideration when it comes to the Norris, and he probably should. Honestly, I would put Siegenthaler ahead of Hamilton and Marino, but he doesn't get the same amount of points. For Minnesota, Jonas Brodin is another example of that. Excellent defenseman, really solid at both ends of the ice, doesn't quite get the points. Spurgeon traditionally has got the points, and he might be a very underrated defenseman too in the NHL. Minnesota fans will tell you that. I do believe I talked about Norris Trophy potentials at one point, left Spurgeon off, and there were some comments from Minnesota fans, and I get it. On the Winnipeg side, I went with Josh Morrissey because there's a ton of points there, and I love Morrissey's game. I love his compete level. Plays a ton of minutes. Plays in every situation for Winnipeg. And honestly, he's been fantastic. On the Washington front, John Carlson. Here's the thing. So we've got Carlson here for Washington and Letang for Pittsburgh. And I'm going to throw them both together. I think for both defensemen, their best years have already been seen. Last year, I think Letang had his best season ever. For Carlson, I think it was, 3 years ago that he arguably had his best season. And there was talk about maybe the Norris for him. I think Norris hopes have faded for both. They're not going to get the Norris this year. Their numbers just aren't in Norris territory, but they're very underrated defensemen. I think overall, when you look at their entire careers, probably not in the Norris conversation right now. Then you get to Boston, Charlie McAvoy, who missed a large portion of the season to start with, just reminding us how fantastic he is since he's come back. But Hampus Lindholm. Hampus Lindholm is playing the best hockey of his career right now. And so if he keeps up this pace, if he keeps up the pace of about a point per game over the season, which is ridiculous because he's never done that, And his defensive numbers are really solid too. I can't rule out Hampus. I can't. He's been a big part of the reason that Boston has a ridiculously good record. I wouldn't rule him out as a potential top 3 for the Norris. Then you get to Vegas. Alex Pietrangelo. Very good season for him statistically thus far. Shea Theodore, I still think, is probably their best all-around defenseman at this stage. But Pietrangelo is still excellent too. And I think the argument can be made for either defenseman. But if you're a Vegas fan, you got to feel pretty good about having those two guys on your blue line. The Ottawa Senators, of course, Chabot being hurt may very well be playing a large role in the just overall fall of the Ottawa Senators. Chabot, he can play 30 minutes a night. He could play 31 minutes a night. He is a horse on the blue line too. But Jake Sanderson, in the absence of Chabot, Sanderson is already showing as a rookie that he can step in there and he can play some serious minutes. So I wouldn't rule out Sanderson for Calder consideration at this point. If he can play this way the whole year, he's going to get at least a look. I don't think he wins it, but he'll at least get maybe top 5, maybe top 3. But yeah, Sanderson's been fantastic, and I do think that he's a solid all-around defenseman for them. The Rangers, of course, Adam Fox, quietly having another excellent season. I think if the season stopped right now, I think the top 3 would be Erik Karlsson, Adam Fox, and I want to say Victor Hedman, because Hedman always gets into the conversation, but I think Fox is a better all-around defenseman than Karlsson. It's weird to say that, because I don't think if I'd said it before the season, there would have been anybody that would have taken offense to that, but with how the first quarter of the season's gone, there would be some who would argue. No, it's Karlsson. Look at his points. Fox, his points are pretty good too, and he's very consistent as well. Ryan Lindgren I want to mention, because Ryan Lindgren defensively is another one of those guys who helps make the offensive defenseman better, and Fox and Lindgren have played together for a very long time. So while I thought, well, maybe I can get Keandre Miller up there, his numbers don't really add up, though, to any kind of consideration for that. I like Miller, but so far, not the kind of numbers you'd want for a guy to be a Norris contender. But yeah, Lindgren, I think he makes Fox better. And that's, again, coming back to the Quinn Hughes argument. That's something the Canucks need with Quinn Hughes. Justin Falk in St. Louis. I know there'll be some chuckles at that, but you know what? Falk might be the most consistent player for St. Louis. Even during that 8-game losing streak, Falk was still getting points. He was still getting goals here and there. He was still playing relatively well. And he's a key guy for them on the blue line. They do, I think, at this point have... I mean, with the 8-game losing streak and the fact the blue line played a role in that, it's hard to say it's an underrated blue line, but I think people were being overly critical of it during the losing streak, and I think it's better than its reputation is right now, if that makes sense. Drew Doughty for LA. I've got to mention Doughty. Still plays a ton of minutes. The point totals are still good, not epic, but his point totals were never really epic either. He was just an excellent all-around defenseman. You throw in the physicality, the really good plus-minus numbers, and Doughty was always a favorite. His best years behind him as well, the same as like with Karlsson and Letang, but Doughty showed last year, before tragically getting hurt, that he's still capable of being dominant for long stretches, so I wouldn't rule him out. Calgary's an interesting one in that there's no one defenseman to look at and say, well, that's clearly a Norris guy. They don't have a Giordano. Rasmus Andersson's had a very good season thus far, though, and Noah Hanifin has really arrived. I'll be interested to see how much Hanifin's next contract's worth, because, yeah, he has definitely arrived. He is a fantastic defenseman right now for Calgary, and we'll see how things go with him. I wanted to put Tanev up, but I couldn't. Tanev, A, the injuries are still going to be a thing with him, the way he plays the game, and B, I just can't see a Norris Trophy for Tanev as much as I like the guy. For San Jose, there isn't really anybody beyond Karlsson, although it's worthy of note that Vlasic's having a better year than he did last year. There are San Jose fans that hearing that would say, well, he can't have a worse year than last year, which, all right, that's fact. But yeah, Karlsson's had a very good year thus far. I know people are going to say, well, that's an understatement. There are still defensive issues there. There are still times where the puck gets turned over, and that's still a part of his game too. There are the high danger opportunities at both ends of the ice with the way he's playing. So you're going to get your 28 points in 20 games. You may end up with some goals going in your net too at the same time. It has been part of his game. That's why I mentioned Mathot too, because having that guy to cover for him is really important. And so, yeah, that's something that for San Jose, I don't know that they quite have a guy who has that perfect chemistry with Karlsson to go, okay, so Eric's in the corner and plays back and knows how to cover. Which is understandable because Carlson can be all over the ice, and I imagine it's a nightmare as a defensive partner trying to make sure you're covering that. Carolina, there's three guys I had to put on the board. I had to put Jacob Slavin, one of my favorites. He was a player that when I started watching every game, I immediately gravitated to because he doesn't make mistakes, he doesn't take penalties, and he's a defensive defenseman. That's crazy. Defensive defensemen take penalties. You see them take hooks, slashes, trips, and you can go, yeah, that's a good penalty because it cut down a scoring chance. There's no goal because he tripped the guy. If he didn't trip him, the puck's in the net. Slavin doesn't take penalties, and there's no moments, for me anyways, watching Carolina games where I thought, if he just played that a little tougher, then that goal doesn't go in. I just don't have those moments. Pesce's an underrated defenseman as a result, too. Brett Pesce, very good at both ends of the ice. And Brent Burns has had quite the turnaround in Carolina. I think he's playing the best hockey he has in years. And it might very well come from the fact that he's playing with elite level defensive defensemen, freeing him up to play the offensive game. In Tampa, there's two right now, because Victor Hedman is always going to get votes. But if you look at the numbers, Mikhail Sergachev is right there with the league leaders in points from the blue line. He's playing a lot. He has been brought along slowly by Tampa. Perfect way to bring a defenseman along. And I remember there was criticisms they weren't playing Sergachev enough or when it was early in his career. I haven't heard any of that lately. So when I hear about, this rookie's not getting enough ice time, this young guy's not getting enough ice time, I think of guys like Sergachev and think, yeah, it can work out okay if you play it right. And I said right, which Shane Wright, of course, he went to the AHL today. That's a whole other discussion. I didn't do a news video on it because I thought, well, that doesn't necessarily warrant a video today. I can put that into tomorrow, so there'll be other stuff to discuss tomorrow. Nashville. Roman Josi, of course, who's won the trophy, had a very rough start to the season, but he has been on fire lately. And so, yeah, I think he's going to be back in the conversation by the end of the season. Ryan McDonagh. If you want to talk about underrated defensive defensemen, you can start and finish with Ryan McDonagh. As impressed as I was with him with the Rangers, that really improved with Tampa. And now with Nashville, it's just, seriously, what's going on here? He seems to get better as he gets older. You look at the defensive numbers for guys in Nashville, there's some scary ones. McDonagh's are fine. McDonagh's numbers are quite good. So while he may not get proper consideration, I again felt like he had to be on the board because Nashville fans would have said, why don't you mention McDonagh? And they would have been right. He's been very good this year. Toronto, Morgan Rielly. No goals yet, but a bunch of assists. Same situation Hughes is in. Rielly is fantastic on the blue line for Toronto. When you play in Toronto, there's two things that happen. You're going to get too much praise and too much conversation from media and from some fans, but you're also going to get too much criticism from some media and some fans because you play in Toronto. And so for Rielly, I think there's too much criticism at times. There's probably too much praise at others. The reality is probably somewhere in the middle, but he's an excellent all-around defenseman, and I think he's a solid investment, long-term investment for Toronto. And I think it's a smart contract they've got him signed to. Dallas, Miro Heiskanen, really, really good defenseman. Solid at both ends of the ice. I have no complaints about Miro Heiskanen at all. I haven't the whole time during his career. And even if he has a rough game, I kind of think, well, but it's Miro. He'll bounce back. So, yeah, Heiskanen is the real deal. I know there's people who think his cap hit's too high. I don't know very many Dallas fans, though, that think it's too high. He is a really solid all-around blue liner. I think sometimes when people look at the contracts for defensemen say that's too much money, I think it's usually tied to points. Usually. And then we finish it off with Florida, a team that won the President's Trophy last year. Aaron Ekblad's come back from injury. You always worry about him getting hurt. He is one of the better defensemen in the game. I think if he didn't get hurt last year, he would have had serious Norris considerations. I don't know that he's going to play enough games this year to get Norris considerations, but he is excellent. But I have to mention Brandon Montour. Montour has been off to a ridiculous first quarter for the Florida Panthers. It's going to slow down now that Ekblad's back. I'm pretty sure his scoring has slowed down at least a little bit. But he's playing a ton of minutes. He's playing really well. And I had to put him on the board because I was like, he's one of the top 5 defensemen in points in the league. And he's playing a lot of minutes. So it's not like he's being sheltered. There are defensemen who have sheltered minutes where, yeah, they get points, but they don't play all the time and they don't play against the top lines. And so there's that aspect. But with Montour, he's just been excellent all around. And it is another really strong example. Forsling's another one on this blue line. Really good example of how Florida knows how to find those diamonds in the rough and how to get the best out of players who maybe have bounced around the league a little bit. Montour was looking like a guy who was going to bounce around the league. I will go ahead and say Montour's time of bouncing around is done. As long as Florida doesn't have to part ways with him for cap reasons. And Florida, much like Tampa, a team that will likely have to part ways with certain players in the offseason for cap reasons for a while to come. Because when you're a good team, that's the way it works. But let me know your thoughts. I know there's going to be defensemen. People say, why isn't this player on the board? I tried. I tried to get as many up here as I could. There were other defensemen I considered, but I thought, no, I have to keep this to guys that I think will either get Norris consideration, maybe have had Norris consideration, or that fans really think is underrated. But you guys can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. And again, the age-old argument with defensemen is always going to be, should points be a major factor in who wins the trophy at the end of the year for best defenseman in the league? My answer has always been no, but I was a very big Rod Langway fan in the 80s. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, whether you watch this Sunday night, Monday morning, Tuesday, or whenever. I will talk to you again soon.